This is not a tutorial video, but I thought it would be interesting to share with you some of the lessons I learned while trying to create a montage including a number of bubbles. The first stage is to create a plain bubble. I created a new document 760 pixels by 760 pixels with a transparent background. A plain black rectangle is overlaid on the background. As I want to place a white object over the top of it, it is best to deselect layers, otherwise changing the colour will change the colour of the black rectangle. Next, select the ellipse tool and set the colour to white with no fill and a small stroke of about 1 pixel. Then draw out a circle filling the black square. Set the W and H values to 740 pixels on the transform panel, then centre the circle in the black square. It might have been easier to do the centering using the Align tool in the Arrange panel. Select the Ellipse tool, then the Gradient option. Now choose Ellipse as the gradient type. Draw down from top left towards bottom right. Open the Gradient dialog box, select the right-hand node and pull the opacity down to 0. From the File menu, select Place and find the image you wish to place inside the bubble, in this case a camellia. Draw the image across the circle shape till it is fully covered. Reduce the opacity of the image so that the underlying bubble is visible and drag the object until it is properly centered. Now put the opacity back to 100% and deselect the camellia layer. Next we will draw a white circle which exactly matches the bubble circle. You will see that I made a few errors doing this, but by entering the same dimensions of 740 pixels for W and H, we ended up with a circle of exactly the right size. Getting the white circle exactly over the bubble is quite important. Switch the camellia layer back on and drag the white ellipse into the camellia layer, offering it carefully so that you see the blue bar in the camellia layers panel. The white circle now acts as a mask. Here I cheated a little using the transform panel by increasing the size of the white circle to 741 pixels. A slight adjustment to the Y value and coverage is almost perfect. Now we move the bubble up the layer stack so that it is on top of the camellia. At this stage the effect is fairly subtle. Before saving this basic bubble, we can select the bubble layer and set the stroke width to 0, as we no longer need the thin white circle around the bubble. I could now start decorating the bubble. Some coloured crescent shapes are the first item. I selected a pale blue colour and drew out a long thin ellipse, which I then converted to curves. Using the node tool, the ends are converted to sharp corners and the bottom middle is pushed up to create a crescent. I suppose I could have started with a crescent tool in the first place. Now, with the move tool, the blue crescent is positioned and the ends adjusted so that the curvature matches the curvature of the bubble. I know this process is going to get complicated, so I carefully named the layer Blue Crescent. Making sure the blue crescent layer is selected, I added a live filter Gaussian blur layer and increased the radius until the edges of the blue crescent are nice and soft. Next, the blue crescent is duplicated, recolored to yellow. Using the node tool, the width of the crescent is changed and it is then moved and rotated into a new position on the perimeter of the bubble. Once again, the layer is properly named. At this point, I tidied up some of the gaffes I had made by accident before removing the black rectangle background. I'm still learning how to use a tablet properly, but on the whole I find it easier to use when doing this kind of graphics work. Now we can switch the camellia back on and see the effect we've created. Now let's make a green flash. I should say right from the start that this process would probably be easier by switching into Affinity Designer and using the pen tool, but I chose to try and do the whole thing in photo. Once again, going to deselect layer is always a lot safer before starting a new step. In this case, I used a cloud shape, changing its attributes on the content toolbar, converting it to curves, and pulling it into an unusual shape using the node tool. Again, rename the new layer. The live Gaussian blur filter is added and the radius increased until the shape is soft. At this point I made a mistake. I tried to reduce the opacity, but this is applied to the filter, not to the object. So I have to undo that and select the object layer before reducing the opacity. The camellia layer is switched on once more and the effect adjusted. We need to add a pixel layer on which we can try some brushwork. The color is set to red and the Grunge 3 texture brush chosen. Getting the size right is important, and it is also important that the hardness is set to 0. A small area is painted in and the new layer is properly named. Yet again, after adding the Gaussian blur, I forgot to select the object when trying to change the opacity and had to redo it. The brushwork can now be repositioned as if it were a blushed reflection from the petals. The sunburst will add a little sparkle. Making sure no layer is selected, the colour is changed to bright yellow and the cog tool chosen. The attributes are adjusted on the context toolbar to produce a sunburst shape with quite a large number of rays coming from it. At this point I wondered whether I needed a new pixel layer on which to paint the cog tool, so I added one. This redundant layer stayed in the project for some time until I later deleted it. That is why this is not a tutorial. Once the shape is complete, it is named in the Layers panel, blurred, resized and moved into position. The next trick is to add a rim of colour using the donut object. Eventually I remembered to push down the Shift key to ensure that it was circular, and the transform panel was used to make sure that it fitted the 740 pixel diameter exactly. It is then dragged into place. A multicoloured style is particularly appropriate to a bubble. The object is softened with a Gaussian blur. However, the ends of the object are a bit sudden, and this is softened by using an erase brush on this layer with a 30% opacity. We could save the bubble at this point, but first I wanted to demonstrate how easy it is to change the image. The new image is imported using the Place command from the File menu and dragged across until it fills the whole bubble square. As it is inserted below some of the effects we have added, and in particular below the coloured rim we have just added, there is no need to change the opacity in order to centre the picture. The new image layer is then dragged until it is sitting just above the camellia layer. The white circle nested in the camellia layer is now dragged until it is nested in the daffodil layer. The camellia layer can then be switched off. The bubbles will probably never be identical, so it is now possible to drag some of the shapes we have created around and resize them or recolor them. Oops, Ctrl-Z, the undo command, is the most readily accessed key on my tablet. It might be sensible at this stage to delete some of the effects, but I have chosen not to do so for the purposes of this video. To make the best use of these bubble pictures, they should be on a transparent background, so the black square at the bottom of the layer stack is switched off before saving as a PNG file, as this supports transparency. This is where the fun starts. I made 4 PNG bubbles before creating this composite. First, the background picture is opened. Using the place command, the first bubble is drawn on top of the background picture and the opacity reduced. Next, again using the place command, the camellia is drawn in its preferred location. Right-clicking on the camellia, it is easy to click duplicate and drag a copy away, resize it to produce a small group. The opacity of the 2 bubbles can then be adjusted. Now we will do something a little more ambitious with the daffodils. The first bubble is placed and its intensity reduced. It is then duplicated, a copy dragged away, resized and the opacity reduced further. This process is repeated until there are 5 bubbles. I thought this process might be easier to do in Affinity Designer using the symbol mechanism, but that is not very helpful for pixel objects like these bubbles. Now I created a group by shift-clicking on each of the 5 bubbles, then right-clicking on the layer stack and selecting Group. The group is renamed Daffodils. By right-clicking on the group in the layer stack and clicking on Duplicate, we can drag away another copy of these 5 bubbles, resize them, and further reduce the opacity of the group as a whole. The same procedure is followed for the snowdrops. Using shift-click in the layer stack is probably a quicker way of creating a group. There is the finished result. I saved it as a file named Spring Dream. I hope you enjoyed the journey. Sometimes you see a reflection of something like a window frame in a bubble. That is a bit more challenging and is the subject of another video. That's it.